CSI on its new night, CBS.
That's good. Okay. Back to you.
The Pentagon briefing is now underway. Here's the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld.
For the many volunteers, establishment, and from the excellent units from all throughout this region.
Operate from our land, the Taliban said.
Lafayette Square. Claire, I want to check in quickly with you, if I may, to know that if we know anything about the President's plans for this evening.
Board planes, either through passenger screening or by going
Force base in Bossier City, Louisiana at about 10.
Reporters, let's listen.
Offering their sympathy and indeed their assistance in various ways. I'm very pleased to be joined here by Chairman Carl Levin and Senator John Warner. Senator Warner called earlier today and offered his support and was kind enough to come down and has been with us. We've very recently had a discussion with the President of the United States. Chairman Hugh Shelton has just landed from Europe. Secretary of the Army, Tom White, who has a responsibility for incidents like this as executive agent for the Department of Defense, is also joining me. It's an indication that the United States government is functioning in the face of this terrible act against our country. I should add that the briefing here is taking place in the Pentagon. The Pentagon's functioning. It'll be in business tomorrow. I know the interest in casualty figures, and all I can say is it's not possible to have solid casualty figures at this time, and the various components are doing roster checks, and we'll have information at some point in the future, and as quickly as it's possible to have it, it will certainly be made available to each of you. I'll be happy to take a few questions after asking First General Shelton if he would like to say anything, and then we will allow the others to make a remark or two.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Secretary just said, today we have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people, acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country. I extend my condolences to the entire Department of Defense families, military and civilian, and to the families of all those throughout our nation who lost loved ones. I think this is indeed a reminder of the tragedy and the tragic dangers that we face day in and day out, both here at home as well as abroad. I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Chairman. Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin.
Our intense focus on recovery and helping the injured and the families of those who were killed is matched only by our determination to prevent more attacks and matched only by our unity to track down, root out, and relentlessly pursue terrorists, states that support them, and harbor them. They are the common enemy of the civilized world. Our institutions are strong, and our unity is palpable.
Senator John Warner.
Thank you. As a past chairman preceding Carl Levin, I can assure you that the Congress stands behind our president, and the president speaks with one voice for this entire nation. This is indeed the most tragic hour in America's history, and yet I think it can be its finest hour, as our president and those with him, most notably our Secretary of Defense, our chairman, and the men and women of the armed forces all over this world stand ready not only to defend this nation and our allies against further attack, but to take such actions as are directed in the future in retaliation for this terrorist act, a series of terrorist acts unprecedented in world history. We call upon the entire world to step up and help, because terrorism is a common enemy to all, and we're in this together. The United States has borne the brunt, but who can be next? Step forward and let us hold accountable and punish those that have perpetrated this attack. Again, I commend the Secretary, the Chairman, and how proud we are. We spoke with our President here moments ago. He's got a firm grip on this situation, and the Secretary and the General have a firm grip on our armed forces and in communication of the world over.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions and then we'll adjourn. Charlie.
Mr. Secretary, did you have any inkling at all, in any way, that something of this nature and something of this scope might be planned?
Charlie, we don't discuss intelligence matters.
I see. And how would you respond if you find out who did this?
Obviously, the President of the United States has spoken on that subject, and those are issues that he will address in good time.
Mr.
Yes.
Secretary, we are getting reports from CNN and others that there are bombs exploding in Kabul, Afghanistan. Are we at the moment striking back, and if so, is the target Osama bin Laden and his organization?
I've seen those reports. They, in no way is the United States government connected to those explosions.
What about Osama bin Laden? Do you suspect him as the prime suspect in this?
It's not the time for discussions like that.
Mr. Secretary, you said you could not be specific about casualties. Can you give us some characterization of whether it's dozens or hundreds in the building?
Well, we know there were large number, many dozens in the aircraft that flew at full power, steering directly into between, I think, the first and second floor of the, opposite the helipad. You've seen it. There cannot be any survivors. It just would be beyond comprehension. There are a number of people that they've not identified by name, but identified as being dead, and there are a number of casualties. But the FBI has secured the site, and the information takes time to come. People have been lifted out and taken away in ambulances, and the numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
Mr. Secretary, could you tell us what you saw? Mr. Secretary, do you consider what happened today
We're looking also at a picture while we listen to the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld of helicopters that we believe are returning to the White House from Andrews Air Force Base. Marine One is the helicopter that has the President on board and lands on the south lawn of the White House, which is the routine procedure when the President returns to the White House from Andrews Air Force Base. These are helicopters that we're now seeing approaching the south lawn of the White House. That's a picture of downtown Washington that you're seeing right now. President Bush just landing only a few minutes ago at Andrews Air Force Base, returning to the White House, getting ready to address the nation around 9 p.m. Eastern tonight. Once again, Marine Corps helicopters that we believe are one of them carrying the President and his party returning to the south lawn of the White House. There are 6 helicopters there altogether, 6 Marine Corps helicopters.
It's not possible to give guarantees. The people who work in this building do so voluntarily. They're brave people, and they do their jobs well.
Mr. Secretary, can you give a sense of what happened? What did you see when you left your office, ran down to the site, and apparently helped people on stretchers and then returned to the command center?
I felt the shock of the airplane hitting the building, went through the building and then out into the area, and they were bringing bodies out that had been injured, most of which were alive and moving, but seriously injured. And a lot of volunteers were doing a terrific job helping to bring them out of the buildings and get them into stretchers and into ambulances and into airlifts.
Mr. Secretary, can you tell us how many of the dead were soldiers and how many were civilians? Have you been able to determine that?
Absolutely not. Yes.
Mr. Secretary, today we saw military planes both in New York and in Washington. How much more of a military presence will we see now that this incident has occurred for the next week?
Those kinds of decisions are made day to day. It is correct that we had aircraft flying protective missions at various places in the United States today, and they will do that as appropriate.
Mr. Secretary, what do you say to the American people who may have questions on how something so coordinated has been carried out against this nation? What do you say to them who might not have confidence that our intelligence and our security are what they should be?
I say to them that the President of the United States will be making some remarks to them this evening that will address those subjects.
Mr. Secretary, you've declared, the Pentagon has declared ThreatCon Delta forces around the world. Could you tell me why? Have you received any threats, or has anyone claimed credit for this?
We have, in fact, declared Force Protection Condition Delta and a condition of high alert, indeed the highest alert. We did so almost immediately upon the attacks, and it is still in force.
Mr. Secretary, were there threats, excuse me, issued against other U.S. facilities elsewhere in the world today?
I don't know that there's a day that's gone by since I've been in this job that there haven't been threats somewhere in the world to some facility somewhere. It's one of the complexities of the intelligence business that you have to sort through those kinds of things. But we don't get into the specifics. Yes. You raise your hand back? Yes.
So, Mr. Secretary, rumors earlier in the day...
Let me interrupt the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, to report that this is, we believe, Marine One, the President's helicopter, now landing on the south lawn of the White House, which is the usual procedure, bringing President Bush back to the White House from Andrews Air Force Base. The President began this day in Sarasota, Florida, where he was going to be promoting his agenda on education, then flew to Louisiana, then flew to Nebraska, and finally, when the Secret Service and U.S. law enforcement thought it was safe, now bringing him back to the White House, where later this evening he will be addressing the nation. Air Force One about to touch down on the south lawn of the White House. John King, our senior White House correspondent, is standing by. John, what do you have over there?
Wolf, as you watch Marine One land here on the South Lawn, we have just been allowed back into the White House. We were evacuated as well earlier today. First, let me read you a statement from the President. This during his travels back to Washington. The President telling his National Security Council, quote, "We will find these people and they will suffer the consequences of taking on this nation. We will do what it takes. No one is going to diminish the spirit of this country." Now, the President will return to the White House. One of our cameramen, Mike Bannigan, also just a short time ago shot pictures of Laura Bush coming back to the White House in her motorcade. We do not know where she was, being kept in a secure location at this time, but the First Lady is also back in the White House. Also, after Secretary Rumsfeld finishes his briefing at the Pentagon, a number of Bush administration cabinet officials will brief here at the White House to bring us up to date on the activities of their agencies. One, we're told, the Health and Human Service Secretary Tommy Thompson, who is involved, of course, in the medical help, blood banking and others, so he will bring us up to date on his agency. Attorney General John Ashcroft also on his way to the White House as well, we are told. All of this leading up, all these briefings from administration cabinet members leading up to a nationally televised address from the President tonight to the American people from the Oval Office. You see there Marine One sitting on the south lawn of the White House, a virtual ghost town throughout much of the day as it was evacuated. The President now back in Washington and at the White House. Wolf.
John, the trips to Louisiana and Nebraska that the President took today, that was designed, we're told, and we see a Marine officer walking off Marine One as the President, we expect to emerge from Marine One any second now. We assume that was because security personnel thought it was too dangerous for the President to come right back to Washington. Is that right?
The first stop at Barksdale in Louisiana was designed so the President could get to a command and control center that is fortified and structured so that he could be in contact. You see the President there emerging from Marine One, saluting his Marine escort on the south lawn of the White House. The direction he turned, it appears he is heading straight into the Oval Office. Had he gone straight, that is the path into the White House residence. The President turning left, indicating he will go straight into his office, the Oval Office. The President saying nothing as he walks by there. The first stop was to get him to a command and control facility so that he could have secure conversations with the Vice President, who is here at the White House, and with the National Security Council. At that point, we had been led to believe by some sources the President would come directly back to Washington. Then they took him to the headquarters of the Strategic Air Command for another briefing with the National Security Council amid some concerns that they wanted to run a few more security checks before bringing the President back to Washington. Obviously, one of the heinous acts we saw today on the Pentagon just a few miles away, so an enormous amount of security concerns. Even as we speak here on the grounds of the White House, you see the President here heading up into the path, being greeted by more agents and his senior staff into the Oval Office. Wolf.
And as he goes into the Oval Office in the West Wing of the White House, once again, John, for some of our viewers who may just be tuning in right now, read to us the statement that the President has just released.
This is a statement from the President. This is a statement, we are told by pool reporters, that he gave to his National Security Council, quoting the President, quote, "We will find these people and they will suffer the consequences of taking on this nation. We will do what it takes. No one is going to diminish the spirit of this country." We expect a statement very much like that to be included in the nationally televised address the President delivers to the American people tonight. He is meeting right now in the Oval Office with senior advisors to be brought up to date on the latest casualty figures, the latest information the federal government has on just what took place. The administration has also taken one of the steps, Wolf, that seems routine in some ways. Again, a reminder of the tragedy of this day, though issuing a statement just a short time ago declaring the state of New York a major disaster area. Wolf.
And John, security, I take it, at the White House is extraordinary right now under normal circumstances. You don't see the security personnel that we're obviously seeing right now. Is that right?
That is correct. More security on the grounds, more security out in public, uniformed Secret Service, snipers on the buildings all around the compound here. Remember, this compound, the President was not here at the time, but the Vice President was evacuated this morning when all of this was taking place, when the threat on the Pentagon was taking place. Now they're just now letting people back in. We are, I believe, the first reporters to broadcast live from here, others just getting into the compound now. The security all day long, we were just across the street watching the dogs, the bomb-sniffing dogs out on the compound. Agents at one point patrolling across the street in Lafayette Park with automatic rifles. That an extraordinary scene. We occasionally have bomb scares here. There are occasionally other threats, security threats that cause high level of alerts. Nothing in my 4+ years on this beat, nothing at all like this today. Wolf.
Okay, John King, we'll be back to you. Stand by. Meanwhile, let's go back to Bill Hemmer in Atlanta. Bill?
Well, thank you, and to our viewers who are just joining us possibly at this time, what has been a very already long and horrendous day in the U.S. We're going to quickly recap the developments of this day. It began with a series of coordinated terrorist attacks against the U.S. Then at the top of this hour, less than 60 minutes ago, explosions were seen in Kabul. That's the capital city in Afghanistan. However, reporters traveling with the President and the White House also tells us these explosions
World Trade Center. First the one on the east side, then the one on the west side. In the moments which followed, chaos on the streets below. People were reported to be coming out of buildings, one after another, trying to give aid to their neighbors as the smoke and flames began to tower out of the World Trade Center. 80 stories up for one of them, a higher distance for the other. And there are literally people hanging out of the windows here as you watch. There is a jet plane inside that tower of the World Trade Center as this man or woman hangs out and wonders what in the world has happened around him or her on an early morning day, a Tuesday morning, just getting to the office to begin the nation's work. The flames continued to tower, and then minutes later, the first of the two towers collapsed to ruin.
They were responsible for the explosions here in Kabul. The that they plan more such attacks. They don't say where and they don't say when. They say that they will brief us shortly on that, but they are claiming responsibility for the attacks we've seen here in Kabul this evening. It's not normal for them to attack Kabul in this way, but their leader, Ahmed Shah Massoud, a very key commander who holds together the alliance of fighters in the north of Afghanistan, he rose to fame during the Soviet occupation in the 1980s, where he was undefeated.
All right, clearly we have a breakup of our signal there from Nick Robertson in Kabul, Afghanistan. What you're seeing, though, as the video phone, late technology that allows us to see these nighttime pictures here. It's not nearly as clear as a regular television monitor would provide, but we can see the images of a quieter capital city of Kabul, and Nick Robertson's audio clearly has dropped off at this point. We hope to reestablish the signal again. It's almost 3 o'clock in the morning in Afghanistan, but back in New York, it's just about 7 o'clock, and again, we're about 10 hours removed from what has been a day that will live for a long time in the memories of a lot of Americans who have watched the images throughout the day. Back to New York City, the island of Manhattan, and CNN's Paula Zahn. Paula.
Thank you so much, Bill. And as you just said, even though we're 10 hours out, you can see behind me the remnants of the fire still coming from that area where 2 commercial hijacked jets rammed into Tower 1 and Tower 2 of the World Trade Center. Within the past hour, building number 7, which is also attached to that area, collapsed. As you might remember earlier in the day, Tower number 1 and 2 collapsed, the South and North Tower. We are now being told by officials that the Marriott Hotel, which is in the vicinity of this area, is also in the position of being so degraded it might collapse as well.
Minute drill here.
It is now believed that that attack on the Pentagon has killed or injured at least 100 people.
Inside the World Trade Center.
Because our people are going to need reinforcements pretty soon.
From that direction, covered in dust.
Right now, who is the former director of
officers. For the most part, those rescue workers do not have.
I'm having trouble hearing Mr. Gates. Let me see if we can make a little adjustment with our audio. As we try to straighten that out, we should probably point out that city officials at this point still will not confirm how many injuries there are, how many fatalities. Secretary Rumsfeld also saying the Pentagon is not in a position to share those numbers with us as well. Mr. Gates, are you with me?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. I'm glad you can hear me, sir. In the last news conference that we just watched, Secretary Rumsfeld would not confirm if the Pentagon had any indication of an impending attack. He said he could not divulge that intelligence information tonight. Do you think the Pentagon had any sort of forewarning?
I'm in no position to know whether there was any kind of warning provided. What we often have, though, in these with dealing with terrorist threats in the 1980s and in the 1970s is information of some kind of an impending operation, but without the kind of detail that would allow you to prepare or to defend. We ran into that with the attack on the Marine barracks in Lebanon in the early 80s and so on. So there might have been some kind of a general warning, or there may have been a specific warning, but often you get the kind of information that allows you to say something is coming, but without the kind of detail that allows people to take specific actions.
Sir, I don't know whether you would agree with this assessment, but the feeling I got in the street this afternoon that the sense of shock could quickly turn to a sense of outrage. Why weren't we better prepared, or why wasn't the United States better prepared for this kind of attack?
I think we have to bear in mind, even against the background of this catastrophe today, that the FBI and CIA have thwarted some very major terrorist operations against the United States in recent years. They've had some very important successes and saved a lot of lives. I think that there will be a time when all of this, when things have settled down, when people will be looking at what happened, what information was available, what was not available, and making some judgments about whether remedial actions need to be taken. But I think it's way too soon to begin making assumptions about some of those things.
Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi has just called the incident horrifying, calling on Muslims to help. How do you interpret that statement?
Well, my guess is that there are an awful lot of people around the world that are pretty frightened right now about what the United States is going to do. As you said, this sense of horror is likely to turn to a sense of outrage, and I think the rest of the world, and particularly people that in the past have supported terrorists and given them a safe harbor, and helped them in some way, are probably quite worried at this point about what may be coming against them.
All right. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, Mr. Gates, because we need to go back to Wolf Blitzer. We're going to get back to you later on this evening. Wolf Blitzer joins us now back from the Washington Bureau. Wolf.
Thank you very much, Paula. And we want to go right to Jamie McIntyre, our military affairs correspondent. He's standing outside the Pentagon, which, of course, took a huge blast today, a big attack at the Pentagon. Jamie, tell us, first of all, the headline from what the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said at this briefing that we just heard.
Well, probably the headline is what he didn't say, which is what the United States will do next, except to hint that the U.S. has firm resolve in this matter. Perhaps the biggest hint coming from Joint Chiefs Chairman General Hugh Shelton, who said he doesn't want to talk about what's going to happen next, but he said to the American public, rest assured, make no mistake, your armed forces are ready. So the United States clearly hinting that they are willing to take military action as soon as they can determine who is responsible.
And circled around to slam directly into the Pentagon. The controllers couldn't identify this plane, as I mentioned, and they are now saying the skill with which the plane was flown, including this knowledge of how to turn off the transponder, raised the probability that a trained pilot was at the controls, possibly a hijacker. Sources close to Don Phillips, the staff writer, were not specific about the times of the event, but said that after leaving Dulles, the plane continued west for a while. At some point, apparently, after turning off the transponder, the plane turned back toward Washington with no radar contact, no radio contact, headed directly for 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It would have appeared on radar screens as an unidentified blip called a primary target, something commonly seen by controllers when an aircraft does not have a transponder or is a military aircraft flying with the transponder turned off. But the airspace around Dulles, Washington Reagan National, and much of Washington is designated Class B, which means no one's supposed to fly in there without a working transponder. They knew something was up, but they watched the plane begin turning to the right, away from the Pentagon from the southwest. Then it dropped below radar level, disappearing from the controller's screen shortly before hitting the Pentagon just about 9:30 a.m. Washington time this morning, less than an hour after the two aircraft hit the World Trade Center, flying below 10,000 feet at an extremely high rate of speed. Now it's believed at least, that a trained pilot was at the helm when Barbara Olson and many others on board were crashed into what was largely an unoccupied portion of the Pentagon, a fire which burned throughout much of the day. The fires are still burning in lower Manhattan. The rescue effort is underway. The 44,000 police officers of this city have not had a moment off since all of this began. You are looking live from our Midtown headquarters now as the smoke continues to rise, and certainly now the emotions go all over the spectrum. In the hours after the Oklahoma City bombing, grief and tears and wonderment, how could such a tragic thing happen? And then you turn toward anger, and then so many in America's heartland who stood as a shining example of what America can do, standing in the face of such unbelievable terror, and so many of them, by the hundreds of thousands, turned to their local churches and synagogues for the help which they no doubt could find nowhere else. Edward Cardinal Egan, who is head of the Archdiocese of the City of New York, who is mourning and grieving with all of the rest of us this night, has been kind enough to join us on the phone. Cardinal Egan, thank you. And how do you find words to express sympathy for the families of those lost this day?
Well, it's very difficult to find those words, but I believe we have to find them. I was down at St. Vincent's Hospital this morning, shortly after 9 o'clock. I even watched the second building collapse. But what I watched with the greatest esteem for this wonderful city was the dedication of our police officers and our firefighters and the total self-giving of our healthcare professionals here in New York. No one was looking for anything but to be of assistance and to give a hand to whoever needed it. I had the great pleasure of standing next to doctors and nurses who were giving a care that was a care of love. I had the difficult task of anointing some who were very badly hurt and one who shortly afterwards went to his God. But in every case, I saw a courageous town, a town of people of peace, a town of people who are not committed to retaliation or hate, but who do look for and indeed demand justice. This is a civilized community. This is a noble community. And we are a people who are hurting tonight. We've been hurting all day, but we're in the hands of our God, and we hope to show the world and the nation how to handle a thing of this sort.
Edward Cardinal Egan of the Archdiocese of Manhattan. Certainly, the churches of this city will be overwhelmed in the days to come. The reality of this situation is not yet known, and the death toll is not yet known as well. We're expecting a briefing in Washington, I believe. Let's go back to Britt Hume. Britt? Britt Hume, are you with us in Washington?
Just a couple minutes. Shep, you hearing me all right?
I got you now, Britt.
Yeah, we expected that from the White House briefing room, two cabinet officers, Secretary of Health and Human Services Tommy Thompson, Attorney General John Ashcroft, and Joe Albaugh, who is the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which obviously deals intensely with rescue and recovery efforts, disaster relief, and that sort of thing, are expected to appear in the briefing room, which you can see there. Just about a minute and a half from now, they're expected to be in there to brief on various activities. Of course, you're looking at a briefing room which was not available for government use for most of the day because the White House, including its press facilities, had been evacuated. And so we're awaiting that, and as you can see, we have the picture up. We'll bring it to you live. And of course, it's as we wait, it's probably worth bringing in for a moment at least Brian Wilson, who has been following events from various points around town today and has some sense of the kinds of things that people outside the Washington Beltway and outside the confines of Manhattan and New York have been experiencing. Brian, what have you picked up?
Yes, that's right, Britt. Basically, one of the things that I heard from outside the Beltway from relatives in Texas is that a lot of gas stations, even in Texas, are being flooded, among reports that there's apparent panic across the country that gasoline is going to rise dramatically. And there are reports that indeed many of the Walmarts and discount stores around the country are being run on as if there was a hurricane coming. So there is this element of panic being reported, at least anecdotally, in many areas of the country. People concerned about what may happen in the days ahead. Here at the Pentagon, of course, Britt, they are at ThreatCon Delta, and will be for some time now. But I must tell you that it is at least reassuring to know that despite the fact that you see a gaping hole in the south side of the building,
well, Brian,
that the Pentagon continues to operate.
We'll be having General Ashcroft, Secretary Thompson, Secretary Mineta, and Director Albaugh will each be providing you with updates on how their agencies are responding to today's events. As we'll be giving you as frequent as updates as possible, they will not be taking questions at this time. And with that, I will turn it over to General Ashcroft.
Thank you. Today, America has experienced one of the greatest tragedies ever witnessed on our soil. These heinous acts of violence are an assault on the security of our nation. They are an assault on the security and the freedom of every American citizen. We will not tolerate such acts. We will expend every effort and devote all the necessary resources to bring the people responsible for these acts, these crimes, to justice. Now is the time for us to come together as a nation to offer our support, our prayers for victims and for their families, for the rescue workers, for law enforcement officials, for every one of us that has been changed forever by this horrible tragedy. The following is a summary of the known facts surrounding today's incidents. American Airlines Flight 11 departed Boston for Los Angeles by suspects armed with knives. This plane crashed into the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 175 departed Boston for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77 departed Washington Dulles for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 93 departed Newark for San Francisco, was hijacked and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Crime scenes have been established by the federal authorities in New York, in Washington, D.C. area, in Pittsburgh, in Boston, and in Newark. The full resources of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Bureau of Prisons, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Office of Justice Programs are being deployed to investigate these crimes and to assist survivors and victim families. Thousands of FBI agents in all of the field offices across the country and in the international legat offices, assisted by personnel from other Department of Justice agencies, are. The FBI has established a website where people can report any information about these crimes. That address is www.ifccfbi.gov. That address again, www.ifccfbi. Can report any
terrorist attacks.
It takes courage for individuals to come forward in situations like this, and I urge anyone with information that may be useful and helpful to authorities to use this opportunity. The Office of Victims of Crime has established a toll-free 800 number for family and friends of victims. They can call 800-331-0075 to leave contact information for a future time when more information is available, to find out information about a victim, or to find out information about the rights of victims and the services available to victim survivors and victim families. The determination of these terrorists will not deter the determination of the American people. We are survivors, and freedom is a survivor. A free American people will not be intimidated, nor will we be defeated. We will find the people responsible for these cowardly acts, and justice will be done. Tommy.
Every single American lost something today. And every one of us at this time expresses our deepest sympathy to the victims of today's tragedies and their families. It is now our mission to begin the healing from this tragedy. From the moment that we learned of these attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services has begun readying teams and resources to be sent to New York City and the Washington area to meet any needs of state and local officials. So far, we have sent 4 disaster medical teams to New York City, and 3 of these disaster medical teams in the Baltimore area. These medical teams each consist of about 35 physicians, and other emergency needs. We've also sent response teams to New York and 3 to the greater Washington area. We're also in the process of shipping a great deal of emergency medical supplies to New York City with the help of the Centers for Disease Control. In short, we're making the full force of the Department of Health and Human Services, both its resources and medical expertise available to the areas that need our assistance. We've also this afternoon activated the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, which consists of approximately 6,000 health professionals. We also are giving backup assistance to the 500-bed ship Comfort from the United States Navy. Americans all over are calling up and asking what they can do. The best thing they can do is respond to this great call by volunteering to give blood. We need Americans to continue to answer that call. No matter where you live, please do your civic duty and assist us by donating blood. It is our primary job is to make sure Americans harmed by this tragedy get the help that they need. We will remain in constant contact with the governors, the mayors, public health officials, and other local officials to make sure that all their needs are being met. It is a sad day, but America and all of its citizens certainly share tonight in the grief that it's been caused. And as the President and everybody in his administration have said, we, the government, will continue to operate and continue to provide the services to all Americans.
One of the most cherished freedoms is the freedom of movement, the ability to move freely and safely. But today that freedom was attacked. But we will restore that freedom throughout the national transportation system as soon as possible.
We're looking at a picture also on Capitol Hill where the Senate and House leadership is preparing to speak, flanked by hundreds of members of the U.S. Congress. Here's the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert.
The hearts and souls and feelings of the victims and the families that were a part of this great tragedy that happened in this country today. Our prayers and thoughts and words of consolation goes out to all those who have suffered. But one thing that happens here in this place is when American suffers and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and as a government stand united, and we stand together. Senators and House members, Democrats and Republicans will stand shoulder to shoulder to fight this evil that's been perpetrated on this nation. We will stand together to make sure that those who have brought forth this evil deed will pay the price. We're not sure who this is yet. But we have our suspicions. And when that is justified and when those suspicions are justified, we will act. We will stand with the President, we will stand with this government, and we will stand as Americans together through this time. Thank you.
Today's despicable acts were an assault on our people and on our freedom. As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow. And we will speak with one voice to condemn these attacks, to comfort the victims and their families, to commit our full support to the effort to bring those responsible to justice. We, Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, stand strongly united behind the President and will work together to ensure that the full resources of the government are brought to bear in these efforts. Our heartfelt thoughts and our fervent prayers are with the injured and the families of those who have been lost.
We know as a nation, as we said, our thoughts and prayers are with those families and those injured and those who are the casualties of today's attack. We also remember those thousands of people who are rescue workers. We ask now that we all bow our heads in a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you. A pointed display of bipartisan unity at this critical moment in U.S. history. It seemed like a spontaneous singing of God Bless America by scores of members of the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, seriously trying to send a message of unity during this difficult moment. Let's go back to Paula Zahn in New York, where she's got more details on this tragic day in Manhattan. Paula?
Thanks so much, Wolf. I think all day long you have seen the images replayed of exactly what happened here in New York City, the city a victim of multiple attacks by hijacked commercial airlines. Joining me right now is Matt Cornelius, who was in the unfortunate position of being mid-level in Tower 1, the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Matt, thanks for joining us tonight. What happened? Where were you?
Well, I just arrived at work, probably about 8:40 a.m. I put my lunch away, and I was getting ready to start the day, when all of a sudden we heard this tremendous crash. It was a really loud sound, followed by a sharp jolt in the building, and then the floor kind of seemed to wave.
We are looking at this incredibly dramatic shot of the impact of the American Airlines hitting the North Tower. You were not aware at all of what could have caused it.
We had no idea. Obviously, we knew something had struck the building. Somebody screamed out, "An airplane's hit the building," but I think that was just a guess. And when I thought about that, I thought probably a private plane, because you often see them flying around the World Trade Center. No one could have ever thought that it was a commercial jet plane of that size.
And your immediate instinct, I suppose, was to get out of the building.
Yeah.
Describe the evacuation.
Well, it wasn't, because people hadn't really arrived at work yet, it wasn't very organized. We basically decided...
Now that actually represents the second attack that happened 18 minutes after your building was struck.
Right. So when we got struck, everyone basically started running for the stairways. and we went in immediately to the stairways and started our way down.
Were people pushing and shoving, or was it an orderly exit from the building?
People were confused at first, but once we were in the stairway, people were very orderly.
How long did it take you to get out of the building?
About 45 minutes. Some people were upset they had gone through the bomb in '93.
How could it take so long to get out of the building? You had 65 flights of stairs, you're a young man, but one would think you could get out of there quicker.
We moved very quickly, probably 15 minutes to the 40th floor. And then after that, we got held up. There were firefighters coming up the stairs, police officers, and I believe FBI agents. So they were coming up, and there were people, there was a man in a wheelchair who they were trying to assist, so we kind of had a hold for him. But people remained calm throughout this and kept saying, you know, we're going to take it one stair at a time, everybody's going to get out. And, I think we weren't aware of the situation. We thought it was an isolated event. I think had we known what was going on, it would have been a different story. But
these pictures obviously show the unspeakable horror and tragedy, the fallout from which we're only just beginning to grasp. Once you got out of the building, at what point did you become aware of what had truly happened?
Well, I would say the minute as we came out of the building, actually exited the complex, the police officers were screaming, "Don't look up, don't look back, just go." And I, of course, looked back, and I saw that the second tower was indeed on fire. And that's when it hit me that this was something major. I mean, this was a real catastrophic event. And actually, when we came out of the stairs, there was a lot of devastation in the lobby, and actually the center of the complex, the plaza area, there was a lot of debris and some bodies. I mean, it was truly awful.
We have some shots now that we'd like to show you of what some people have described almost as a nuclear winter, when they talked about the amount of soot coming down on those of you who were fleeing these buildings. Now that you've been able to absorb what happened, what's going through your head tonight? You must feel like a very lucky man.
I feel very lucky. I'm so thankful to be alive. My heart goes out to those who don't know about their loved ones or you know, have lost loved ones, and you know, it's still very surreal. I mean, you know, I look down behind us and can't believe that my office building that I go to every day is gone.
Matt, before you go any further, we were just looking at shots of the countless number of New York firefighters that were on the scene. We are just getting information from a union official of some of the 400 firefighters that initially went into that area. 200 may have perished. Matt, we appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us tonight on this incredibly tragic day of our American history. Let's go back to Wolf Blitzer. Once again, Wolf, New York City officials are not confirming, nor is the Pentagon, exactly how many people were injured here or how many people died. I know Governor Pataki of New York was saying earlier this evening it will be many, many days before we have any of those numbers.
Those numbers are being collected, but I'm sure it's way too early, as you point out, Paula, to have even a rough guess how high that number will eventually go. Just to recap once again, President Bush preparing to address the nation in less than an hour or so, around 8:30 p.m. Eastern, an Oval Office address for President Bush from the White House. CNN senior White House correspondent John King is back on the North Lawn of the White House. John, you're back in the briefing room now. John, you were listening to that briefing when we went to the Capitol Hill congressional leadership statements that were being made. Was there any hard news that came out of that briefing?
Indeed, there was, Wolf. Some details on the emergency responses taking place. The Department of Health and Human Services, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, other agencies taking steps to provide medical and other disaster relief personnel, but also from the Treasury Secretary, Norman Mineta, a glimpse of what will be the near future, at least, for Americans now traveling around the country. Mr. Mineta saying as a result of this, first and foremost, that he will make the decision tomorrow if and when U.S. commercial air traffic can resume, all planes grounded at least through noon, he said, and when Americans do go to an airport or a train station in the future, they are likely to see a much higher level of security.
To increase traveler security. Travelers will indeed see increased security measures at our airports, train stations, and other key sites. There will be higher levels of surveillance, more stringent searches, airport curbside luggage check-in, will no longer be allowed. There will be more security officers and random identification checks. Travelers may experience some inconveniences, but we ask for your patience.
Now the President is in the Oval Office with his national security team preparing for that address to the American people. About 50 minutes away from now, that address from the Oval Office. 4 members of the President's cabinet briefing here. They refuse to take any questions. White House saying that these cabinet agencies want to gather more information. Attorney General John Ashcroft vowing, though, that the perpetrators of these terrorist attacks, he said, would be discovered and punished. And again, much of the information dealing with the relief effort underway over at the Pentagon and up in New York City. The Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tommy Thompson, urging Americans, no matter where they live, to donate blood. He said that is one urgent priority right now. Wolf.
Okay, John King, we'll be back to you. But meanwhile, I want to bring in the former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, who joins us here in our Washington Bureau. Secretary Albright, do you have a sense, you studied this situation, 4 years at the United Nations, 4 years at the State Department, who was responsible for this attack?
I think it's impossible to tell at this time, Wolf, and it's very important to get all the facts straight. But what is essential is that the countries of the world who believe in democracy and human rights stand together. And the statements that have come out, I think, from other world leaders are very important. We all have to stand together. I ache for America tonight, but I know that we will rise to the challenge because we have the best system in the world.
Is there, given the earmarkings of this highly sophisticated, very coordinated attack, that some sort of state sponsorship was behind it?
I think it's tempting to speculate, Wolf, but I think that it's probably wrong at this time to make statements that point the finger. We need to look at the facts very carefully and then respond at a time and place of our choosing. We have the best military in the world. I have the greatest confidence in our military, and I support President Bush. We are all waiting to hear what he has to say. I think the unity of this country is now essential.
But even at a time of unity, we've heard from many members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans today, members of Congress lamenting what they say was an enormous intelligence and security failure. Intelligence in the sense that the U.S. apparently had no advance indication that this was about to happen, and a security failure that 4 planes could be hijacked simultaneously.
I think we will have a lot of time for investigation and finger pointing. I think today we need to offer our condolences to the families of the victims and the bravery of those who have rescued people, and remember that this country is a country of laws, and those who oppose us are only countries that do not believe in a system of laws and democracy and the individual freedom.
You just heard the Transportation Secretary, Norm Mineta, say that travel in the United States is not going to be as relatively easy as it's been. There's going to be much tighter restrictions for Americans. They will have to endure what many Europeans have been enduring now for several years, given the terrorist operations unfolding there and other parts of the world. It's going to cause a reaction, as you well can understand, from the American public.
I think that's the least of our problems. I know when I fly, I actually welcome it when I'm asked questions, and I think it is up to all of us to cooperate. But America can't be shut down. We have to remember that we thrive as an open society, and I think we have to take all the precautions and to try to find the balance between the freedom for which we are noted and the security which we need.
Once the United States learns conclusively who was responsible for this coordinated attack, what should the response be militarily and diplomatically, politically?
Well, I think militarily I will leave that to the defense people. I do know that we have the means to respond in whatever way we want to. We do have the best and strongest military. Diplomatically, I think it is essential to be in touch with our friends and allies, to seek their unified support. Terrorists know no boundaries, they know no limits, and this has been brought home to America this time, but other countries are being threatened, and we need to all stand together. Terrorism can only be dealt with internationally.
You were the Secretary of State when the U.S. embassies in East Africa were bombed. Many Americans were killed, many other nationals were killed as well. The U.S., while you were Secretary of State, did bomb some bases in Afghanistan believed to have been associated with Osama bin Laden. A Sudanese factory was bombed. Clearly, if Osama bin Laden was responsible for this current attack, which has been widely speculated, of course, the U.S. retaliatory strike at that time didn't appear to slow him down at all.
Well, there's no way to prove that, and the truth is that my worst day as Secretary of State was when those embassies were bombed and when I brought the bodies home and met with the Kenyans and Tanzanians who had been injured. The United States has to respond. We have to respond on the basis of the facts we have, not on the basis of speculation, and I think that the important part is for us to all stand together and be supportive of President Bush.
We're going to be showing some pictures, Madam Secretary, of some U.S. warships. Recently, we're in Norfolk, moving out into the Atlantic Ocean, up the Atlantic coast to get out of port. We're taking a look at some destroyers and some frigates now. These are pictures of U.S. Navy vessels leaving the largest U.S. naval facility in Virginia, in Norfolk, clearly perhaps sending some sort of signal, some sort of sign to others who may be out there. What is that message?
That America is strong and cannot be shut down, that we have the means to bring about some kind of a response to this, and that we have the strongest military in the world, and that we're proud of our military.
General Colin Powell, your successor at the State Department, returning tonight from a visit to South America from Lima, Peru. What should he be doing right now? What do we assume he is doing to generate international diplomatic support for the United States position and for perhaps some retaliatory U.S. response?
I can understand that he must be very frustrated not to be in Washington, because I was not in Washington when the embassy bombings happened. I was in Rome, and I came back right away, and what I'm sure he is doing is being in touch with his counterparts and mustering the kind of international support that is necessary, and I'm sure will be forthcoming from our friends and allies, because we're in all of this together.
Madam Secretary, it was good for you to join us on this horrible day in American history. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wolf.
Back to you in New York, Paula.
Thanks so much, Wolf. We're going to try to give you a better perspective of the state of paralysis here in New York City tonight. Once again, we cannot confirm the number of injured, the number of killed here today, but we have just gotten confirmation from a union representing New York City firefighters that as many as half of the 400 firefighters that were initially sent to the World Trade Center area are presumably dead tonight. We have been told that victims have been transferred to some 70 area hospitals. There are pleas for donations of blood from New York City residents. I, in fact, tried to donate blood today, and there was as much as a 5-hour line of volunteers all trying to heed this plea. Right now, I'm going to check in with Greg Clarkin, who joins us from St. Vincent's Hospital, where more than several hundred of the injured were taken. Greg, what can you tell us tonight?
Yeah, we're about a block away from St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan. This is one of the locations that has been set up since for a triage unit, as a triage unit since early this morning. Really an incredible scene at the hospital. What you see is dozens and dozens of hospital workers outfitted in their scrubs, just basically awaiting victims to treat. At this point, what we're hearing is that the pace has slowed down considerably. We've just been briefed by the president of St. Vincent's, that is David Campbell. He says at the moment there are 319 patients at St. Vincent's. Of that, 50 to 55 are listed in critical condition. He also confirmed that there were 3 deaths at St. Vincent's. Also, New York Governor George Pataki stopped by. He spoke to the doctors as well as the victims. One of the doctors overseeing the operations in the emergency room today described some of the injuries that they saw early on. He said at the very early stages of this tragedy, what they saw were severe burns, a lot of trauma, and a lot of heart-related problems. Now, he said the heart attacks and the cardiac arrest could be from pre-existing heart conditions or possibly induced by the trauma that the people saw at the World Trade Center today. Now, tomorrow they expect to get a different type of injury. Right now, the Trade Center is considered a hot zone. There are no rescue efforts underway, the doctor said, but tomorrow they expect that hot zone to be lifted, rescue workers to go back in. What they will be expecting then is what they call crush injuries, and that could be broken bones, anything that happens by people being buried underneath rubble, kidney failure, dehydration, and the like. They're expecting to see a whole different variety of injuries tomorrow. So again, from St. Vincent's, which has been a triage unit throughout the day, the scene has slowed down a little bit, but they do expect it to pick back up when the rescue efforts resume. Paula, back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Greg. And during your report, I just got more information that the New York Police Department now confirms that there are 78 police officers on its force that are missing tonight. Right now, I'm going to turn to Richard Holbrooke, former UN ambassador, to provide some sort of perspective for us this evening. Mr. Holbrooke, we have heard General Shelton describe today's vicious acts as outrageous acts of barbaric terrorism. Senator Orrin Hatch called it an act of war. Senator John Warner calling it the most tragic hour of American history. What is your perspective on this evening?
Well, first of all, Paula, as a New Yorker and somebody who had the honor of being guarded by the New York City Police and working with the firemen, I am stricken beyond words at the information you've just mentioned about the death toll among the police and the firemen. I used to work in that building and was there next door during the previous attack, and as in the 1993 case, New York City citizens have responded in this extraordinary way. Your description of the attempt to give blood is so emblematic, those lines, and I'm just heartbroken about this. In terms of your question, and having listened to your interview with Madeleine Albright, I just want to add something to what she said, and that is this. In the past, Osama bin Laden and other terrorists who do not represent national governments, a distinction which is critically important, but are sheltered in various countries in the world, including Afghanistan, sometimes North Korea, Iraq, Libya, have played this shell game about where the government that shelters them and protects them says, well, we don't know where they are. I think it is absolutely essential for the United States to lead an international effort now that makes clear that any country which shelters people is part of an act of war against the United States. The United States, Paula, cannot make the response alone. It is true, as Madeleine said, that we have the finest military force in the world, and I've been privileged to work with them for over 30 years in Vietnam, in Bosnia, and all over the world. But I will tell you that unless we have international united front of the European allies, the Russians, the Chinese, and I want to stress this, the moderate Arab states, which must close ranks to get the extremists who are behind this, we're not going to be able to succeed. This is the beginning, after we get through the rescue phase, after we find out how the security failure occurred that you referred to, that Wolf Blitzer referred to earlier, we're going to have to turn to an absolutely non-stop diplomatic effort to create the pressure behind which we can take the necessary military action against this act of war.
All right, I hear what you're saying, Ambassador, but it was Henry Kissinger who said earlier on today that we will be able to, or the United States at least, will be able to judge its friends by their level of support in trying to figure out who unleashed this fury today. What, though, realistically, do you think will happen in terms of resistance from some of these countries?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. I heard the interview with Henry Kissinger, and he and I are in full agreement on this. Any government which shelters the people who did this has to be held equally responsible for it as an act of war. And we are going to have to mobilize an international coalition for that position as we prepare to take the necessary military responses. And I know that Henry agreed with that because I listened to the interview.
Oh, no, I don't think I'm saying that anybody has misinterpreted the interview here, but I think there has been some suggestion by other guests that you may not get complete support here.
No, I don't know whether we'll get complete support or not. The Taliban is denying any influence in this thing, but all the evidence seems to suggest that. John King and others on your excellent coverage have suggested that the administration is 90% sure it's Osama bin Laden. If some countries don't participate, let them understand that they're joining a coalition of terrorists who have declared war on the United States. The key nations involved are going to be the moderate Arab states, the Russians, and the Chinese, and other countries which must isolate the cause of this. Osama bin Laden is not a government, but if he is indeed, as the administration appears to believe, behind this, anyone trafficking with him should be on notice that that is tantamount to an act of war by a government. And I talked this afternoon to the Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, who is trying to deal with the consequences of this for the UN. He's going to have to decide whether to postpone or cancel some major UN meetings that are coming up in New York, a children's summit in 10 days. And he has been talking to Arab